I am Shilah Mae Grace, and you are watching the Grace and Andrew Yang comedy show where we mix the fun with a dash of the truth. Tonight, we will be discussing the heinous assault on former President John Franklin Kennedy, also known as JFK, on the date of November 22, 1963. And joining me tonight is aspiring politician and presidential historian, Mr. Smithsonian.
I'm glad to be on the show, but you got a few things wrong already about him.
What?
His middle name is Fitzgerald.
What kind of name is that? I've never heard of it.
It's an Irish name, and also, he wasn't attacked, he was assassinated.
Are you sure about that?
I'm very sure. I've seen the video several times.
Because if you go to Wikipedia, Mr. Smithsonian, you will find that it clearly says that JFK went on to found some Politico, White House meets Playboy meets Vogue magazine named George, with the first issue being published in September of 1995. So I think it was clear that JFK was alive after the attack.
Well, that's because that was his son who did it, John F. Kennedy Jr.
Are you meaning to tell me that JFK's son shared the same exact name as his father?
Yeah, a lot of presidents did that.
Why the hell would they do something like that? I mean, how would you tell them apart?
Well, mainly because they look completely different, and it's because they're such great figures that, of course, they want to name their children after them, so they carry on that legacy. John Adams did it, and his son became president. His name was John Quincy Adams.
Yeah, but there's a difference, because one is called John Adams, like you said, and the other one was called Quincy in the middle, so...
That is true. They had to differentiate between them, but they were still shared the same first and last name. So he technically was a junior.
Okay. I mean, are you saying that these presidents have been trying to fan their own egos?
Possibly.
Anyway, going back to the topic of the attack on JFK, former President of the United States of America. Following the attack on JFK, Mr. Smithsonian, there was no doubt a huge investigation surrounding the country to weed out the perpetrators or perpetrator. Now we know that a man named Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested shortly after the attack in connection to it. Mr. Smithsonian, do you think that this man, Lee Harvey Oswald, a former Marine and father of two, was guilty of this attack?
I think he was involved in the attack. I think he did shoot from that building, but he wasn't the only one. Because, again, John F. Kennedy was killed in this attack. He died 30 minutes later in the hospital after being shot in the brain.
How many shots actually hit him?
Which is the final report on what happened. 3 shots were fired at him in the span of a couple seconds. The first one completely missed the car. The second pierced his back and exited out of his throat. And then the third struck him in the top right of his skull.
It sounds like they really planned this out.
truly does, because if you look at the video, there's a recording of the assassination. It's like a front view. It's called a Zapruder film. It was filmed by Abraham Zapruder. He was standing on a cinder block, and he was above it.
Did you say Abraham Lincoln was filming this?
Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president. This was Abraham Zapruder.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that was a person's name, but
He was
go
just
ahead.
Abraham Zapruder filmed the assassination, and in the video you can clearly see Kennedy goes backwards after being shot. Meaning, if he was shot from Oswald's point of view, he should have went forward because Oswald was behind him.
Oh, okay.
Like he clearly goes backwards as a result of the
that
impact.
makes a lot of sense. So you're suggesting, Mr. Smithsonian, that there were multiple killers, I assume?
Yes. I think there was a team of 12 people.
Okay. But anyway, going back to Lee Harvey Oswald, who was obviously singled out to be the prime suspect behind this attack. According to sources and YouTube, Lee Harvey Oswald was shot point blank by a man named Jack Ruby while being moved in between prisons. So he did not live to be tried in a court of law. Therefore, he is technically innocent because a verdict of murder, one guilty, had never been rendered by an official jury. So what a mystery.
Saying for me has always been, you're guilty until you're proven innocent.
Exactly.
And he was found guilty of the crime at first. And because he was assassinated, he never got to be proven innocent. But despite being dead, there was still a lot of research, and he was proven to be guilty by a man named Lyndon Johnson, who succeeded Kennedy after he was assassinated.
But he never stood trial, Mr. Smithsonian. If you can't stand trial and have an official jury decide a verdict on you, then technically you're not guilty of anything.
So if I commit a mass murder, but then I die, I'm not guilty, right?
That would make sense, yes.
Well, I think Oswald just couldn't keep his name clear. Because after the shooting, he became very nervous and agitated. He left the building, but he was almost apprehended in it, but his boss said, "Don't worry, he works here." So he got off out of there. He left and he went to a local neighborhood, and he could have made it out scot-free. But a police officer named J.B. Tippit questioned him about his outfit because he looked like somebody who was involved in the shooting from witnesses. And so he killed the police officer, and he kept running. So he made it to a movie theater where he was eventually apprehended. When he was questioned, he kept denying that he was involved. He kept saying he was a patsy. And when they were trying to trial him, he was being moved, and he was killed by Jack Ruby, so nobody ever knew if he was telling the truth.
Mr. Smithsonian, so you can't be guilty if you were not convicted by a jury and a judge.
You can commit a crime, die, and still be found guilty of that crime.
I've never heard of that before in my life.
It happens a lot with murder-suicides.
Wait, what?
A murder-suicide where somebody kills somebody else and then kills themselves.
Okay, well, you need to understand, Mr. Smithsonian, that a murder means that somebody killed somebody, okay? Whereas a suicide meant that somebody killed themselves. So you can't kill somebody and also be killing yourself. So you can never join those two. You understand what I'm trying to tell you?
If you look it up, you can see there's many, many cases of it happening.
Okay, enough, enough. So, Mr. Smithsonian, you mentioned though that Lee Harvey Oswald, you think that he was only involved in the attack on JFK and that there were others involved.
Yes. I believe that there were shooters on the grassy knoll right in front of John Kennedy's car, which would explain why he went backwards instead of going forwards when he was shot in the head.
What? How did his protectors not see them if they were just in front of them?
He didn't have protectors on his car, or they were in the car behind him, so they couldn't have possibly saved him.
Yeah, but they could see them in the grass, like pointing a gun, I assume.
Maybe not if they hid behind the fence.
So, do you believe, Mr. Smithsonian, that this father of two named Lee Harvey Oswald, suspect number one, may have acted alone or by command?
I think he was commanded. I think he was the scapegoat for all this. He was the one who was going to take the fall so the others could escape. But Jack Ruby thought that Oswald was gonna talk about the others, and so he had to kill him.
Oh, so they're related?
Yes, Jack Ruby was involved in the assassination, and he had to silence Oswald before he said anything about them.
Interesting, because I read reports where Jack Ruby stated that he was a massive fan of Mr. John F. Kennedy.
He could simply have been lying to draw attention away from himself.
But I'm sure that they might have put him through a polygraph.
Polygraphs are usually always inaccurate.
Are they? I mean, they're supposed to be able to tell if you're lying or not by measuring your blood pressure.
Well, a true good liar can easily beat a polygraph test by staying calm and cool and collected. Many criminals have done this, and that's why it's rarely used ever.
So you're suggesting, Mr. Smithsonian, that Mr. Jack Ruby was a liar, I assume?
Yes.
And, Mr. Smithsonian, how many people were injured from this attack on the former president?
2 people were injured and 1 died. The one who died was John F. Kennedy.
Who was the other one who was injured?
The second most serious injury was Texas Governor John Connally, who was sitting in front of John Kennedy. When the second shot was fired, apparently, it pierced through Kennedy's back, went through his throat, went through John Connally's back, exited through his chest, and then hit his wrist.
Oh, so did this governor survive?
He survived. He was critically injured, but they managed to save him. They could not save John Kennedy, however, since his wounds were so traumatic.
Well, thank you for letting me know, because at least now we know that it wasn't so bad after all.
It was a terrible, tragic event that ended in the death of a president.
I mean, I agree, it never should have happened, but, at least everybody survived, so...
John F. Kennedy died in the attack. He was assassinated.
I mean, Mr. Smithsonian, I know that you keep saying that, and maybe that's what you want to believe, but, I mean, my reporters have told me countless articles out there say that JFK, the former president, was out on a plane ride somewhere and died in 1999. So
that was his son, John F. Kennedy Jr.
It clearly said JFK. It's spelled out like John F. Kennedy.
John F. Kennedy Sr. named his son after himself, so he became John F. Kennedy Jr.
So you're saying that for so many years, because the elder John F. Kennedy named his son exactly after himself, that's why so many people were mistakenly believing that he was still alive.
Well, you're the only person so far who's actually believed that.
No, my reporters believe it. Because that's what they told me. I'm just reporting it to you.
Both of the Kennedys died tragically.
Oh, so you're saying that even the son is no longer alive?
His son died in 1999 due to traumatic injuries from a plane crash.
Well, it just doesn't make sense to me that, you have somebody who named their son exactly the same as he did, thinking that we were all going to be okay with distinguishing the two.
One was assassinated, one died in a plane crash.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Smithsonian.
His son died in 1999.
Hello, Mr. Smithsonian, are you reading me? Hello? I think we lost Mr. Smithsonian. Anyway, my name is Shilah Mae Grace. You are watching the Grace and Andrew Young Show. Be sure to join us next episode for another hilarious trip. Goodbye.